As long as I am unable to exercise my constitutional right to vote, I do not have command of my own life. I cannot determine my own destiny, for it is determined for me by people who would rather see me suffer than succeed. Those that have gone before us say, no more, no more. That means protest, that means march, that means disturb the peace, that means jail, that means risk, and that is hard. We will not wait any longer. Give us the vote.
That's right. No more.
We're not asking, we're demanding. Give us the vote.
And that, obviously, a clip from Selma and the voice of David Oyelowo being Martin Luther King. David joins us. Good afternoon, David.
Hi.
How are you, sir?
I'm very well, thank you.
Wow.
Very well.
And just listening to that clip, we just need to start with, I think, with the voice and the characterization and how you got into and the qualities that you were after in beginning to represent Martin Luther King on screen.
Well, the tricky thing for me was joining the dots between the kind of oratory we know and the person we don't, i.e. the man behind the veil. Of course, people always talk about what an amazing orator he was, his very specific way of speaking, but, you know, they know less about who he was behind closed doors. And that was what was actually more challenging, was to go and find that guy, because, you know, we have lots of evidence of the other side of him.
Was there a phrasing, I mean, in terms of just nailing the accent for an iconic American hero and complicated person, all of which is explained in the story, was there a phrasing, was there a posture, was there a few words that you absolutely had to get before you could move on?
He had such specific ways of saying certain words, and it wasn't even just the accent. It was the phraseology, especially when he is giving those speeches. He had very clear speech patterns, very clear ways of sort of teeing up an idea at the beginning, touching on it in the middle, and then having a rule of three at the end. So if you didn't necessarily know what those aspects of his speeches tended to be, if you heard a whole speech, you would kind of know it was a Dr. King speech, because it has this sort of symphonic rhythm to it. And I had to basically work on breaking that down and knowing what it is in order to be able to do it, because we couldn't use the actual speeches. Everything you see in the film are speeches that were written for the film, and we had to do in the style of him. So, you know, there was a double challenge of really making them feel like they were Dr. King.
Did that strike you as strange that you didn't have permission to use the actual words?
No, not really, because, you know, Steven Spielberg has the rights to the speeches, and we're not about to fight him for them.
How does that even happen? How does Steven Spielberg have the rights to Martin Luther King's words?
Because he has a lot of money. That's basically the truth of the matter. But, you know, in all honesty, it was a huge blessing, because, you know, the temptation would be to use every word of the actual speeches. And, you know, there's only so much you can touch on in 2 hours. And so you want the speeches to relate to what you're actually seeing in terms of the narrative drive of the movie. And that's what we were able to do by basically reconstructing Dr. King's speeches. So I was very, very glad of the freedom that offered me.
So we have Martin Luther King, the orator, but the movie also shows, and it's over a very sort of limited time span, just a matter of months, really.
Yeah.
Martin Luther King, the organizer. And in his secret meetings with President Johnson, and making sure that they move to Alabama because there they think they're going to get more of a reaction from the racist governor and so on. That's an intriguing part of the story, which maybe, particularly in this country, we don't know.
Well, this is the thing. When people think of non-violent protest, I think the temptation is to think of Dr. King and what he professed as maybe a soft option in the face of racial injustice. But actually, it was a very powerful, potent weapon. And it actually worked. You know, their strategy was to go into Selma knowing that violence and injustice was being meted out to the local population behind closed doors, so to speak. And what they did is they made sure the press were present and provoked these people to do what they do anyway, on camera. And those images were amplified to America. 70 million Americans watched Bloody Sunday play out, and that was the point beyond which black people, white people, people of all faiths, young and old, descended upon this tiny little town to protest against the injustice that was happening down there in Selma. And within months, the law had changed. So it was actually an incredibly effective, powerful use of love, really, and nonviolence.
And maybe we should just explain the relevance of the title, because Selma is not a word, not a name that resonates particularly in the UK. Just explain that and where that fits with the bridge scenes that you're talking about there.
Yeah, it's a very good point. So Selma is Selma, Alabama, which is where the events we depict in the film played out.
And the relevance of that in this broader story, and why your director and the screenwriter decided to concentrate on this story, and particularly the huge scenes on the bridge particularly. Why was that picked?
Because I think, often the temptation with a figure like Dr. King is to do a kind of cradle to the grave. He was born here, he did this, he did that, but in 2 hours, maybe 3, that's just too big of a life to satisfyingly explore cinematically. So to focus in on one of the most dramatic episodes in his life and in the movement's life and in America's life is far more satisfying, because you can spend time with certain issues, with certain relationships, with certain circumstances, and you can do that in a satisfying way that is both dramatic, emotional, and moves you with the protagonist through an arc of transformation, as opposed to just touching on each and every episode lightly because you have to move on to the next.
You spoke to a lot of people, did a lot of research, spoke to Martin Luther King's family. What feedback did you get from them? I think Martin Luther King Jr. III said that you were just like him. I mean, what comments have you had, David?
Well, that's one of the most incredible reactions, of course, I've had to the film. You're always going to be nervous when you're portraying someone of Dr. King's stature anyway, but in relation to his children, doubly so. And so for his eldest son to say that I captured the spirit of his father, for his youngest daughter to call the film incredible, and actually she invited me to give a speech at Dr. King's church in Atlanta only about a week and a half ago on Martin Luther King Day. And that of course was an incredible experience for me. So for both his children and Andrew Young and John Lewis, C.T. Vivian, Diane Nash, all people who you see depicted in the film who are still alive, for all of them to love the film and really be supporting the film is something that is just amazingly gratifying for us.
And I'm sure that there'll be people in this country that go to the movie and they'll go and they're sort of swept up with the story and your astonishing performance. And then they were and you were born in Oxford, and then we see President LBJ Tom Wilkinson, who was on the show a few months ago. He's from Leeds, and then we see Tim Roth playing Governor Wallace. He's from Dulwich. Right. We have 3 extraordinary American characters on screen, and they're all British.
Don't forget Carmen Ejogo as well, who's also British. Yeah, I know. But look,
the Americans up in arms about that.
Look, Meryl Streep played Margaret Thatcher. It's a cultural exchange, my friend. I think it's only fair.
No, that's a very fair point. And can I ask you whether you think Benedict Cumberbatch was right when he said, and he's apologised for the language that he used, and I think that's all been accepted, and he said he was idiotic. But was he right to make the point that black British actors have a tough deal in the UK?
Not only was he right, I think it's hugely admirable for someone who isn't necessarily affected directly by this syndrome to be the one to voice it, because, he's a very good friend of mine. He and I did Small Island together here in the UK. He, of course, was in 12 Years a Slave with Chiwetel Ejiofor last year, and he has seen the fact that I will not get the opportunity to play a role like Alan Turing in Imitation Game, or Stephen Hawking in Theory of Everything, which were films made here in the UK. I have to go to America to play that kind of role, which is exactly what Selma represents, which is what Solomon Northup in 12 Years a Slave represents. And we are British actors. We love being part of this tradition, and we wear our Britishness with pride. But the unfortunate reality is that Britain isn't currently engaging with its history in terms of how the centuries that black people have been part of British life. And because we love a good period drama and we're never included in them, let alone contemporary life playing real protagonists, it's you have to go where the ground is fertile. And so we feel compelled to go to America as opposed to it just being a desire.
And is that changing as far as you know? I mean, you're based in LA, but is that changing? Is it getting better, or is it still just as bad?
It's not getting better. It's actually getting worse. I think, in terms of, that's why recently you have Lenny Henry and others being very vocal about this issue, and why different channels are now having to set specific remits for themselves to make sure certain percentages of who they have in shows are people of color. It's a shame that we're having to have that in place in the 21st century in a very clearly multicultural society, but it has to be the case, because basically it's to do with the decision makers. If all the decision makers are of a certain demographic, that reflects the decisions they make, that reflects the people they put on screen, because you put yourself on screen. I'm a beneficiary of the fact that Oprah Winfrey came on board of this project because Selma is reflective of her history and what she wants to see on film, and it's all about advocacy. And the people advocating what we see, the people who are curating culture, tend to be a white male and of a certain age, and that's reflective of what we see on our screens.
David Oyelowo, we appreciate your time with us. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.